of you. How many of you were just elated with the book of Revelations? One. I got one. Duff, thank you. In general, we as people of faith, for all of the books of the Bible that we gravitate to, and particularly as Presbyterians, we tend to avoid this book, don't we? Right? Mostly because there's a lot of crazy stuff out in society around this book, right? People believe a lot of weird stuff around the book of Revelation, let's be honest, right? And if we're being honest, a lot of us are influenced by that because that has been the largest voice in our ear about what this book means. And yet when we read it faithfully, rather than some crazy future where all of the events of the last 100 years are falling into place, because let's be honest, people keep predicting how these events work out in society, and then 3 years later you realize they were totally wrong, right? Yeah. When I go back into my own childhood, I grew up as a fundamentalist Baptist, so we were obsessed with this book. Jesus was coming back any moment, right? And was going to literally vacuum suck us up into heaven, right? That's not how they described it, but certainly as a kid, I was like, we're getting vacuum sucked up into heaven, right? And if anyone was a follower of the Antichrist or the beast, my goodness, right? And so I grew up truly, this is my own spiritual trauma, terrified that somehow there was an Antichrist out roaming the streets at night who was going to go in and sneak into people's homes and stamp their foreheads of their hands with 666, and there you go, hell you go, right? And I was terrified of this as a child, truly. However, the silver lining, the silver lining is that I have spent a lot of time in the book of Revelation trying to parse apart all of this crazy trauma from my childhood and come to a faithful understanding of the book. And one of the biggest pieces about the book of Revelation is that rather than being a book about, Jesus coming back in 1976 or whatever it was, right? 1988, right? It's actually a book about the majesty of God and giving us a vision that was larger than the Roman Empire, larger than Caesar, larger than Nero. See, this book was most likely written during the time of Nero's reign over the Roman Empire. And the book of Revelations offers us a contrasting vision to the world's empires. And the world's empires in the book of Revelation is symbolically referenced as Babylon. And of course, even in our own history, we go back to the Babylonian Empire. It's a great empire, a large empire, a majestic empire. And over again, throughout the Bible, we have these empires like Egypt, like the Babylonians, like the Assyrians, like the Persians, then the Greeks, and then, as of this writing, in all of the New Testament, the Roman Empire. And so for John, there's this giant vision of what the world can be like, and the contrast between our lived reality here on the ground versus what the ideal is. St. Augustine was inspired by this vision himself. If you don't know St. Augustine, you should. He's kind of one of the founding theologians of our faith. And a lot of what we believe today can trace itself directly back to St. Augustine. He wrote a giant book called The City of God. It's literally that thick. Anyone read it? No takers, Duff? What about you? No? Okay. Yeah. It's this thick. I have not read it from beginning to end either, right? It sits on my shelf. It's a reference for me. But I've read a lot of it over the decades. City of God gets into our view of who God is, our view of humanity, our understandings of government and rulers, and how there is a faithful, sacred, holy path to human relationships versus the way that human society has tended towards and has done it often in our history. And these are set up as the city of God versus the city of man, Jerusalem versus Babylon. St. Augustine wrote in a time period when the Roman Empire was in decline, where it was falling apart, where all of the people, including the leaders of the church, were worried that with the fall of Rome might be the fall of civilization. Anyone hear tones that reflect our media right there? No matter which channel you watch, no matter which party you vote for, that's what everyone's talking about, isn't it? Yeah, this idea of decline and what that means. And will democracy fall? Will civilization fall apart? Will our entire consumerist capitalist market fall apart as a result? And St. Augustine wrote City of God in the midst of that. And he lifts up this vision that says, oh, friends, whether Rome falls or not, Rome was never the ideal. Rome and its emperor were never what we were shooting for, what we're aiming for. And in fact, every time we aim for that, it's actually going to decline even more. That our ideal is this New Jerusalem. It's Revelation 21 and 22. It's this vision that we just read here today that lays out for us a vision and values of God in the midst of everything and everyone. Do you see how that text started out? Literally started out with, and there was no temple there. There was no temple there. Think about it, for the entire ancient world, no matter where you would go, some sort of temple or temple-ish structure existed. It was the center of human civilization wherever you go in the world. And there the people would come and they would worship. They would worship God, they would worship gods, plural. They would worship things that were giant in creation, like the sun, the stars. They would worship different things that were larger than their own individual self or village. And in these places, human society would gather in some way, shape, or form and go through various rituals. And those rituals became the story and the values of that civilization, that culture's life together. And so if you go back to ancient Babylon or ancient Rome, right, the gods centered into their religion, their politics, their economics, their culture, all of it. And as emperors and kings often do, they find their way inside of those same religious rituals as well, don't they? Every single time. And so governments, empires, kings, and kingdoms would form in and around to the point where the king would become a semi or demigod in the midst of it all. And so Caesar, and Nero specifically, is referenced over and over again as the Son of God. And for us, I mean, it just seems wild that humanity would do that. And yet how often does human beings in the midst of decline, in the midst of destruction, in the midst of rubble, turn to someone and go, we're going to make you a God, right? It's good that Jim's sitting here. Jim has no inklings in his own ego or mind that he wants to be God. In fact, he's like, please, no, right? And yet, how many people, and really throughout history, how many men have thought, you know what, if everyone just does things my way, then all of a sudden, right? And so in this book, we get this deeper, bigger, wider vision of humanity. And you see in it that in this heavenly, celestial vision, humanity's not wiped out. Community's not wiped out. Economics is not on the side. In fact, the nations are bringing their wealth, their honor, their glory, their blessings into this city. The vision of that future, of that glorious ideal, isn't just all of us sitting around the heavens singing. I mean, that happens too, of course. But in the midst of it, there's commerce, there's economics, there's trade, there's goods, there's glory, honor, and blessings from everyone pouring into this new Jerusalem. And there's a river that's as bright as crystal going through the middle of it. And on the banks of this river are the tree of life. That tree of life that references all the way back in the book of Genesis, right? Remember, there are two trees at the heart of this Garden of Eden. There's a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the one that Adam and Eve are not supposed to eat of, right? And of course, like little children, we go, I want what I can't have, right? And then there's this other tree, this tree of life. And once Adam has taken of this tree of knowledge of good and evil, God actually says we must bar them from the tree of life. Otherwise, they might live forever in this state. And so this tree of life shows up here at the end of Scripture. This book ends, Genesis to Revelation. What does it mean for this tree of life to literally be at the center of this city, to be at the center of its life? And its leaves and fruit are for what, does it say? The healing of the nations. The healing of all of us. The reconciliation, redemption, salvation that sits at the heart of what it means to be human beings together. That's what this tree of life is for. We have a phrase that we use for this. It's this phrase, the common good. When I was growing up, I heard this phrase a lot. I heard it from politicians. I heard it even in church. When I was growing up and reading foundational books to Western society and culture, referenced this common good phrase a lot. When you go back 100 years ago, my goodness, everyone talked about the common good and our common wealth. And I don't hear hardly anyone using this phrase anymore. It pops up on occasion, but it's not ubiquitous throughout society. It's not saturated like it used to be. What does it mean for you and I on this Memorial Day weekend to consider the common good, to consider what our ancestors gave their lives for? What does it mean for you and I to consider the ideals that this nation was forged around and lift those up? What does it mean for us in our faith to point to those values that have symmetry with that story, with that founding? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, What does it mean for us to strive for more perfect union together? What does it mean for you and I to lift up the city of God as that vision, as that ideal? In the midst of a world that is so self-centered and self-centric, in a world that has lost the meaning of sacrifice, in a world that is losing the meaning of compassion and mercy, how will you and I lift up this book called Revelations? Go, oh friends, I am following a different story, a different narrative that is beyond Babylon, beyond Rome, beyond America, and instead looks at all of the sacrifice of the people in our lives, of soldiers, of sailors, and go, they were pointed towards something larger and greater and higher than self, who more than self thy country loved. It's right there in the midst of America the beautiful. May that be our vision. Amen.